By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, and we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps on the willows in the midst thereof, for there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. It's awfully difficult, if you have visited Jerusalem, to understand why anyone would feel this way. It's dirty, it's ugly, it's old, it's run down, it's smelly. It is only the history, it is only the mystery, it is only the mystique of Jerusalem that makes it beautiful to me when I go there. And I have to see past a lot of things to appreciate that. But then I never saw Solomon's temple. I never saw that city in its pride. I never saw it when it was fully under the control of men who loved God and who were dedicated to His service and who would have done whatever it took to make the temple and the city beautiful and clean and prosperous and honorable and everything that one would hope that the city of God, could possibly be. And there's no way that we could estimate or understand or grasp the love of Jerusalem, of the people who lived there, the people who visited there, the people who worshiped God there, the people who went up to this beautiful edifice that Solomon had built, and that all the way down, as much as neglected the religion, they still tended to take care of that place because of what it had come to mean to everybody. It's hard for us to understand how they would have felt. And then when the city fell, and they were all carried away captive, and they were carried to the land of Babylon, and they sat down beside the rivers of Babylon, they wept when they remembered Jerusalem, because all hope was gone for a generation. The people who were carried captive, the people who actually were carried away, would never go back. They would never see it again. They would never experience it again. They would never pray in the temple environments again. And so when they asked them to sing a song of Zion, we'd like to hear what your music is like, they just simply hung their harp on a willow tree, their lyres, and said, how in the world can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? I think there is a metaphor in this psalm. For one thing, Jerusalem is a lot like the church in the sense that there is a metaphorical link in the Bible between Jerusalem and the church. And by church at this point, I don't mean some organization or something that man put together. I mean that mystical body of God's people everywhere, irrespective of time or place or circumstance. That great body of the church of the firstborn whose names are written in heaven. That's what I mean when I say the church. But as prophecy tells us, if we get down toward the end time, in this metaphor, there would surely come a time when the church, like Jerusalem, would be laid waste. There are people scattered and lost and confused, and I don't know if what we have called the church, which has indeed been laid desolate really in the last year, let's say 18 months. I don't know if we are a tiny metaphor. I don't know if we are just a hint of what might be yet to come in the world. But surely the church, as we have come to look at it, is laid desolate. And there seems in the minds of many people to be little reason to sing the Lord's song in a strange land. They're lost and they're confused, and without the visible church and all of its institutions, its ministry, its buildings, its plant, its programs, and whatever else it has, they're just lost. And the desire to sing the Lord's song, as it were, has been lost along with it. By the rivers of Babylon we sat down, and we wept when we remembered what we had, and what we were, and what we could have been, and what we will never see again perhaps in this age, as we are scattered and lost and alone, and somebody says, sing us the Lord's song, or sing us a song of your place or your church. And we think, how can I sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And yet, All over the world, there are those who refuse to give up the faith, and they will sing the Lord's song, regardless of where they are, and regardless of what they're up against, regardless of the risk, regardless of their loneliness, regardless of whatever, they will sing the Lord's song. Daniel was such a man. Shadrach was a man like that. Meshach was a man like that. Abednego was a man like that. They were not home. They were in a strange land. But with all the pressures, with all that might be laid upon them, with all the fear, with all the worry, they would not give up the faith. They would not give up on their belief in God. And so when challenged, they went into the fiery furnace. When challenged, Daniel went into the lion's den. For they knew that God would be with them, and that God would keep them safe, and that they could sing the Lord's song in the den of the lion, or in the mouth of the furnace, or wherever it was they might happen to be. Now, whatever you may think of the leaders of what we have called the church who have now been scattered, and who may be forming a global church of God, or a United Church of God, or a CGI, or a CEM, or a Philadelphia Church of God, or a Church of God the Eternal, and there are more names out there of people who have been scattered from what we might have looked upon as the church. All over the place, regardless of what you might think about them, they will sing the Lord's song, even in a strange land, even without the former connections, even though they may bicker with one another about technical points of doctrine, even though some of them may not like one another and consequently not willing to work with one another, like Paul and Barnabas finally came to where they wouldn't work with one another anymore. They will sing the Lord's song. They will not lay it down. They cannot let it go. It is woven into the fabric of their being, in their spirit, that they can no more refuse to sing the Lord's song, can try to live without breath or without food or without drink or without water. It is, in very fact, their life. And it's all over the world where these people are now. We hear, because of our rather unique position in Christian educational ministries, that we are not aligned with any church organization. We're here to serve anybody and everybody wherever we can find them and however we can find them. We're hearing from people from Australia, from England, from Europe, South Africa, that strange far-off land of Canada. Sorry, brothers up there. Everywhere there are people who will not roll over. And they are passing their small test, and it is a small test compared to what Daniel had to face, and it's a small test compared to that of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But they are passing their small test in their own small way, and they will sing the Lord's song, regardless of where they are, whether they are with somebody or whether they are alone, they will continue. And they and we are passing this small test because we have kept the faith. The faith. Back in the book of Hebrews, there is a lengthy passage, not just the 11th chapter, it's rather more than that, that deals with this question of the keeping of the faith, the hanging on to the faith, of the believing that we have come to do, the singing of the Lord's song, if you will, that I think has a tremendous amount of inspiration it ought to have for us and help us through what for many people is a very difficult and disorienting time. In chapter 10, verse 35, it says, "Don't cast away, therefore, your confidence, which has great recompense of reward." And there are just a lot of times in life where the temptation to cast away your confidence, your faith, is very strong. When it just seems so much easier and so much better and to make so much more sense to just go back to what you used to do. To just do it the old way, to stop the struggle, to stop the fight, to hang your harp on a willow tree, and refuse to sing the Lord's song. I'm in a strange land. How can I sing His song here? How can I represent God here? How can I do anything for God here, where I am? He said, you have need of patience after you have done the will of God, that you might receive the promises. The promises. I don't know about you folks, but one of the biggest problems I've got is I want it now. I don't want it tomorrow. Not tomorrow, next week. I want it now. Right now. Not this afternoon. Now. And when I pray, I want an answer now. He says, you've got to grow up. You have need of patience. After you have done the will of God, He didn't say how long. And the thing that disturbs us so much is that God's watch runs at a different speed from ours, and what doesn't seem very long to Him seems like an eternity to us. After you have done the will of God, then you might receive the promise. For yet a little while, and he that will come, and he will not tarry. But isn't he? It certainly seems to me that he's tarrying, but he says that he's not. Now the just shall live by faith. That belief, that confidence, that choice that you make. And you know, faith is not just a feeling. It's not just the fact you say, well, yeah, I believe God is up there. Faith is often a choice that you make. You actually decide to put your faith in someone, to put your faith in God. You decide to trust Him in the situation you're in. No matter how great the temptation is, you can trust Him, you know. No matter how much the rewards for disobedience may seem to be, you can trust Him. No matter how great the temptation is, you can trust Him. And you know that you can. The problem is that sometimes being able to bring yourself to do what is called for by that trust is not so easy. But if any man draw back, my soul shall have no pleasure in him. And there are more opportunities to draw back than there are, it seems, to go ahead. And the temptation to draw back is so strong and to take it easy is so powerful that it's easy to forget. The just will live by faith. But we are not of them that draw back unto perdition. We are of those that have faith to the saving of the soul, the saving of the life. Then it continues in chapter 11, what you are so familiar with as the faith chapter, and I think that it should have started a little earlier, as you can see I did, because the subject matter, the idea starts even before where I started. I just had to find a place somehow to begin on this particular theme that I want to talk to you about today. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The most fundamental thing for you to know about faith is that if you already have something, you need have no faith for it. If you already see it, faith is meaningless. If you possess it, faith is nothing. You hope and you pray and you have faith in what you do not have and in what you do not see. And you say to yourself, I don't see it, but I know what God expects and I'm going to do it. In the process of doing it, you have faith that God will fulfill what He has said and what He has promised. It's like this work that we are attempting to do. Whenever I had to make a difficult decision last year, I've said, and probably you're maybe tired of hearing me say it by now, I really don't know what God is doing. I just know what I got to do. I know what tasks He's laid upon me. I know what charges He has given to me, and I have to do them. I don't have any choice in the matter. It is woven into my life. Someone asked me, well, what are you going to do if you leave CGI? And I said, my answer was, I will be a minister to the day that I die. Minister means servant, and it means that I will serve God's people in whatever capacity I have until the day that I die. You know, and there's no particular honor that attaches to me for that. Being a minister is so much a part of what I am that to not be one would be to deny myself, much less to deny God. And this is true of men I could name that some of you will know and some of them you will not. It's true of Roderick C. Meredith, who heads up the Global Church of God. That is who he is. And he will be a minister to the day he dies. He has no choice. Those men, there are too many of them to name, who are leading the United Church of God. These are good men. They're good-hearted men. And whatever one may think about their theology or their approach to administration, they really have woven into their whole being the Lord's song that they must sing, that they must put out this message that God has given to us, and they have no choice in what they would do. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, and it has to do with things that we must do and that we know we must do. For by it the elders obtained report. Now follows through here all sorts of illustrations and examples of faith, and time will not permit me at all to go through them all. But if you'll pass down to verse 6, there is one short statement that I think is important for us to grasp. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. Most people tend to look at that first verse as the definition of faith. I don't think so. I think verse 6 is where you find the definition, the thing that will help you to really understand faith. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. For he that comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is the rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. Faith is that simple. You believe that God is, and you believe that it makes a difference how you live your life in relation to God, that it is not merely an exercise in futility. It's not just something you do and there is nothing at the end of it. That He rewards those people who diligently seek Him. Actually, there are not two words in the Greek there. There is only one. And the sense of the word is, one of the senses given is, who crave Him. He is the rewarder of those who crave Him. It is not merely a matter of a lackluster looking. One must really look for God and to know that there is a reward at the end of the search. And so it is that I really think that a lot of what drives you in your life is that craving for God, which He, by the way, put in you. That He made man with a hole in the middle. A hole where He, God, the faith in God, was designed to fit. And as long as that is not there, man will be empty. And we may try to fill it with food. We may try to fill it with entertainment. We may try to fill it with other people. But the truth is there is nothing that will fit that place. And there is nothing that will take care of that craving except God Himself and knowing God. And so we look. Sometimes we look half-heartedly. Sometimes we look offhandedly. But there is a reward for those who crave God and who search for Him and who really look. By faith, Noah, who was warned got warned by God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house. What a simple little illustration of faith. God comes along and He says, I'm going to destroy the whole earth with water. It's going to be 120 years before I do it, but it's going to be done. And I want you to build an ark, and I want you to build it to these dimensions. And then God went away. The question Noah had to deal with is, will I believe God? Is God telling me the truth or not? And since I do believe God, then I must go to work. And I must work day by day by day by day for 120 years. You know, there are times, and there have been several times since last November when I resigned and we incorporated CEM, when I have looked at the task, when I've looked at what there is to do, and I have felt defeated, and I have been discouraged, and I've even gotten a little depressed because the scope is more than I can see, more than I can grasp, and more than I can reach. But on the other hand, if you told me to build a boat that was of the size and the scope and the dimensions of the ark out there, in the middle of the subdivision where I live, which is a long way from water, I don't have a clue as to how to start. I know what a keel is, and I've looked at boats a lot, but I really don't understand boat construction. I really don't understand how to put the planking of a boat together so that it doesn't leak. I understand about caulking seams with pitch and bitumen and things like that I can sort of figure out. But I've not only got a lot of work to do, I've got a lot of education of myself to do. I have to find out how so many things have got to be done. There is an enormous task. So, if you look at it from Noah's perspective, the task that was laid before him must have seemed utterly impossible. And yet God gave him enough time to do the job. How did He do it? Well, He did it one day at a time. He did it by doing Monday's work on Monday and Tuesday's work on Tuesday and Wednesday's work on Wednesday and just continuing day after day after day after day to build what was there to be built. I was talking to the group that are working on these Sabbath school materials, and I said the task is just overwhelming. When you consider really how big it is, you go look at what the Baptist Church has done and their whole package of youth materials. And they got a church of 20 million people, and as I said, more universities than we got churches. The talent pool that they can draw from is just staggering. And look what they've done. They've done some marvelous material. And now here we are saying we're going to do something like that ourselves. This little group, with our small group of people, with our, we're talented and we're dedicated, we believe what we're doing, and you could say it can never be done. But yes, it can. It may take 120 years, but it can be done. I jest. The point is that you must do Monday's work Monday, and Tuesday's work Tuesday, and you divide up the task that is to be done, and you begin to produce what there has to be. Noah's an odd situation with Noah was, unless he finished it, the thing was no good at all. He had to get it all done. Every last bit of it had to be done all the way out to the end, or else none of his work was worth anything. We do have the advantage that some of our work will be worthwhile, even if we don't finish the entire task. And so we launch out on the task in faith with a job to be done, and we do today's work today. These things are really fascinating as you read through this 11th chapter of Hebrews, trying to understand what it was that was laid out before these people and the way in which they individually and personally tried to respond to what God gave them to do. By faith, verse 8, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he would afterward receive for an inheritance, obeyed and went out not knowing where he was going. You know, at least we have the option in many cases of deciding we're going to do this job. We lay out a set of goals and objectives for ourselves, and we pursue them, and we kind of know what we're doing. And yet, over it all, there is still this sense that we really don't know the end from the beginning. We go out in a great deal of faith, believing that we can accomplish things that are worthwhile without even knowing for sure how God will use it, what He will ultimately do with it, how far He will take it. And we start out in some cases in one direction, not knowing for sure, but what God will stop us and send us off in another direction. I remember Paul on one occasion said we had stopped in this city, and we had tried to go north, we had tried to go east, we'd attempted to enter these other cities, and he said every time we did, the door was slammed in our face. Now, I don't know how, I don't know if it's customs officials, weather, earthquake, or what it was, but every time they tried to go, they got the door shut on them. And so he said, well, that won't work, let's try this. That won't work, let's try this. And finally one night, he's lying in bed, and he has a vision. A man who is obviously a Macedonian, in the vision says, come over and help us. He got up in the morning and said, okay, let's check the shipping, and let's get ourselves across the straits here and into Macedonia, because I am sure that the closing of these doors and this call that has come to me, the Macedonian call, is of God. Now, he could have gotten to the ship, and that door got closed, and said, well, I guess I was wrong about that, but it wasn't. He went, and God did lead them. So we start out on a task with the faith that God will correct us, that He will show us the way, that when we come to a turn in the road, He will tell us which way we have to go, or we can trust that either way will work. One may be harder than the other, but we will trust God to take us down that road that we have chosen, if we have chosen it, and to make it work, or to bring us back up that road and send us down the other one. There's an enormous amount of trust in everything we do. Whenever I talked to Larry Watkins, as we did originally, about what we're going to do with CEM ministry, we had a kind of a vague idea of what we might do. I in my own mind, had a kind of an outline of what could be really a very large work, operation, lots and lots of things, an enormous amount of things out there that could be done. But what we came to understand was that we need to look at our resources we've got now, and that the options that are available to us now, and begin to ease out into those things that we know that we can do. We're sure of it. And so we very simply started a tape program. That was really easy. We invited some folks over to our house, got in the living room, put it on a tape recorder, and did a Bible study, and presto, week one of the tape program has started. So we roll the tape program. We want to do a newsletter. Well, that's not too terribly hard. Due to some things that have taught us a few things in the past about computers and the use thereof, we're able to put together a newsletter. So the newsletter comes out. And so it is that we take each step. One of the things that we had hoped for was to be able to produce some Sabbath school materials or youth ministry materials that would be of help not only to churches but also to parents in teaching their children at home and beginning to bring their children into the faith, so that the children, as they grew up, did not and left their father's house, didn't leave the faith at the same time they left their father's house. And so we began to contemplate how we might do this, and miracle of miracles, the personnel resources, the human resources for this task just dropped into the task. The people, the very people that had been working on this type of thing before, were there, they were available, they wanted to keep on working with it, and they were willing to work with us in trying to get it done. And so we had that dropped in our lap. And, other opportunities. I had the idea of radio, and who wouldn't, with the history that we have in our organization going all the way back to 1934 of radio. But I had a friend who is the man who had sat across the glass from me when in the radio studio when I did virtually all of the Epistles of Paul series. He used to be the producer for the Garner Ted Armstrong radio program. He worked for us, was on our payroll many years ago. Well, he left us when we stopped the radio program, set up his own studio, his own business, and he's percolating away here in Tyler. Well, he and I are friends from way back. And so I charged down to see him one day and said, I wonder what we can do. And I'd kind of like to get on radio. And he said, sounds like an awfully good idea to me. He says, I'll help you do your first demonstration tape. I'll do it free. And so we did. And if it weren't for him, and if it weren't for that resource and that opening, I'd still be sitting here trying to figure out how to go about getting on radio, probably because there are too many things to do and not enough time to do them. And you kind of choose sometimes between the thing that's making the most noise instead of the thing you really ought to be doing. And so God seems to open this door and close that one. And basically our approach is that what God gives us to do and what He gives us to do it with, that's what will determine the direction that we are going. It isn't that we have no plan. We have a plan. But beyond the plan, we have a faith, a belief that we are serving God, that He will honor that. I'm not going to call what we are doing the work of God, except maybe just, carelessly along the way. Because the work of God is bigger than any of us know, imagine, or have ever had any part in. His is a rather big operation, in case you hadn't figured that out. What we are doing is working for God. And I believe so far God is blessing our efforts. And I'm reluctant to say that because that sounds like name dropping. And so what I generally tell people is, well, so far we do not appear to be under any curse. And if He is not just terribly pleased with it, at least He's not upset with us. And He's letting us enjoy this. He's letting us play this game, if you will. What He's doing is letting us sing His song where we are, in the way that we can, with what we've got, and with what we can carry on with. It is really encouraging to look back at these people and realize that in a lot of ways we're doing similar things to what they did. That we sense a leading from God, and we say, okay, we'll try it. We'll do it. We'll step out there. And we'll look for God in what we are doing. We will look for His hand and His guidance. We will accept His correction. We will go where He wants us to go. And it's exciting. It's encouraging. It's uplifting. Oh, that's not to say we don't get a little depressed every once in a while at one thing or another, but the whole thing is has got so many possibilities, and it's so exciting that none of us would ever want to be somewhere else or doing something else. Later in verse 13, we are told, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims in the earth. And so, I guess we have to accept the fact, each one of us here does, that we are like a cog, I guess, in a machine, but that's a very, very poor analogy. We're like a cell in the leaf of a plant that's working away merrily and doing our part of the job of what God is doing. But we're more than that. But the point is that none of us who are here may even live to see the culmination of the things that we do. And it's highly possible, highly likely maybe even to say that all of us will not live that long and will not see it. Abraham died in faith, not having received the promises, but knowing that he had done through this life what it was that God would give him, and that God ultimately would fulfill those promises. He had a confidence, actually, in the resurrection of the dead that might lead one to wonder, where did he come by it? How did he know about it? But Paul sees it very clearly that he did. They died in faith, not having seen the promises, not having received them, but having seen them a long way off. And so they pursued them. They that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. Now here were the people who went into captivity in Babylon, who hung their harps on a willow tree and says, I can't sing the Lord's song in a strange land. And Abraham was never in anything but a strange land. He was never at home. He was promised the land, but he never got it. He was always a stranger. And if he never sang the Lord's song in a strange land, Abraham would never have sung the Lord's song at all. But I have little doubt that he did. He continues with all of the different things that these people did, and all the faith and the examples of faith. He says in verse 31, by faith the harlot Rahab did not perish with those that believed not, because she had received the spies with peace. She believed that God was behind what the Israelites were doing. And because she believed, she took action upon it and protected the spies of God. And what more shall I say? For the time will fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, of David also and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. The kinds of works were varied, wide, and they had a lot to do with where the person was and what they were doing, and just pure happenstance. But every one of them had to face some aspect of a test of faith. They quenched the violence of fire. They escaped the edge of the sword. Out of weakness they were made strong. They waxed valiant in fight. They turned to flight the armies of aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Others had a trial of cruel mockings and scourgings and bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were cut in two. They were tempted. They were slain with the sword. They wandered around in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, afflicted, and tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. And wherever they went, they sang the Lord's song. They didn't hang the harp up in a willow tree and says, I can't sing the Lord's song in a strange land. The depression, the discouragement, the downheartedness. And you have to realize that these are the people who were carried into captivity because God was not pleased with them. There were people with whom he was more displeased. They were the ones that died in the famine. They were the ones that died by the sword in the city. And these were allowed to live. But they went into captivity perhaps because they hadn't really even sung the Lord's song in their own land. He says these people the world was not worthy of. They wandered in deserts and mountains, dens and caves, and these all having obtained a good report through faith, because they trusted God. They had faith, and they acted on it. They received not the promise, God having provided some better things for us, that they, without us, should not be made perfect. So we then are going to have to join that group. Which group? The group of people who wandered around and lived in caves and dens and what have you of the earth, who were naked and destitute and poor, who suffered and were thrown in prison and everything else. This is the group that's waiting for us to join them in their faith. Therefore, seeing that we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, I mean the witnesses, the string of them, the cloud of them, the great stories of these people are huge. He said, seeing this, let's lay aside every weight and the sin that does so easily beset us, and let's run with patience the race that is set before us. In a sense, that could be the motto that we put on the wall down at our office. Let's run with patience the race that is set before us. Because we are small, we are few, we are crowded, we step on one another getting around the office and stumble over one another and get in one another's way all the time. We have a job. There's something to do. And he said, you need to run this race with patience and not get discouraged and quit and give up because things aren't happening fast or now, or even to recognize that what you're going to do is you're going to lay a foundation here and someone else is going to finish it. It could be that way. And so we must work. We must do what there is to be done today. We must do Monday's work Monday and Tuesday's work Tuesday. He goes on to say, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the stake, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of God. Now you consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your mind. It's awfully easy, having had contradiction of sinners against oneself, to get discouraged and defensive and want to fight back and have problems with it. He said, well, you really ought to consider Jesus, don't you think? And all that he received in terms of contradictions of sinners against himself. You have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. And no, I haven't, and I doubt if you have either. You have forgotten the exhortation that speaks unto you as children. My sons, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when you are rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chastens not? You know, the problem that I have with that passage, this passage of Scripture here, and I have a problem, is how can I tell if what has happened to me is time and chance or if it's the chastisement of God? It's not else easy to know. But you know, sometimes with hindsight, by the way, you have to deal with it the same way, whether you know whether it is or not. You have to basically deal with it as though it were chastisement from God, whether it is or whether it isn't. So don't worry too much about that. But a lot of times when you get out on the other side and you look back over it a little ways, you can sometimes begin to see, yeah, maybe there is. And I think for those of us who are of our faith, with our traditions and background and so forth, to look back over the tracks behind us, I can easily see the hand of God in what has happened to us, what has happened to our church and our churches and belief systems over the past 12, 18 months that has happened, as a form of chastisement. A chastisement for complacency, a chastisement for selfishness, a chastisement for leaving things to other people that we ought to be doing ourselves, a chastisement for a lack of personal growth, a chastisement for not staying close to God, a chastisement for putting organizational loyalty as a substitute for loyalty to Christ, to His work, and to what He is doing, a chastisement for relaxing of moral standards, a chastisement for relaxing of the discipline of study of the Bible and of God's Word and of applying it in our lives day by day. That there would come a time when God would say, you people have had it too easy, you've had it long enough this way, enough already. There was the first century church who were in Jerusalem, living in peace, very successful in doing the work of God, baptizing people on the right hand and people on the left hand, and who found a contentment so great that they were out selling properties and giving them to the group, and they were having all things common, and they were finding in the church a great refuge. And then finally God came along and hit the church with persecution and scattered the whole group of them to the four winds. The most significant thing about that whole story is what it tells you they did when they were scattered to the four winds. They went everywhere preaching the gospel of Christ, which to me tells me as much as I ever need to know about the chastisement of God upon the early Jerusalem church for sitting on their lees and not getting with it and going as Christ had told them to go. So I can accept what has happened to us as chastisement. And if I accept it as chastisement, then I have got to pull up my socks. I have got to begin to focus on those things that I had not focused on before. We've all got to realize the ways in which we have begun to trust others to do things for us that we really should be doing for ourselves. We have got to learn how to function without a guide, an overseer, or ruler, which is one of the most fundamental lessons in the entirety of the book of Proverbs. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. It's not a question of diligence. It's a question of doing what you're supposed to do without having to be told to do it. You rely on your church. You rely on your leaders. You rely on your ministers. You rely on your great apostle to tell you what you ought to do tomorrow and next week and next month and next year. And God says, enough already. It's time for you to work for a change. He said, those people in those times simply didn't understand it. Whom the Lord loves, He chastens. We had fathers of our flesh, verse 9, who corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shouldn't we much more be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? They verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure, but He for our profit, that we might be partakers of His holiness. Now, no chastening for the present seems to be joyous but grievous. That's right. It does not feel good, and you do not look forward to it. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them that are exercised thereby. So lift up the hands that hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet. And let that which is lame be turned out of the way, but let it rather be healed. Follow peace with all men, and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. He talks a lot about this chastisement and the overcoming of it. And finally, he comes down to verse 25, and it says this: See that you refuse not him that speak. Because if they didn't escape who refused him that spoke on earth, talking about Moses, how much less shall we escape if we turn away from him that shook the heavens and the earth? Now I want to back up just a little bit. He's talking about Israel, and he said that they could not endure, verse 20, that which was commanded, that if so much as a beast touched the mountain, it should be stoned or killed. And so terrible was the sight, Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. He said, you haven't come to a mountain like the mountain where they received the Ten Commandments of God. That's not where you've come. You have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn that are written in heaven. General assembly. The Greek word's an interesting word. We get the word panegyric from it. It basically means the gathering together of the whole thing. That word doesn't refer to, let's say, something like the Tyler Church of God, which is an assembly of God's people in Tyler on this particular occasion. This is the whole church, irrespective of time, place, circumstance, location, generation, whatever. You have come to the whole, complete assembly of the saints of God of all time. You've actually come alongside of Moses. You've come alongside of Matthew and Paul and David and these other men. You are come to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are written in heaven, and to God, the judge of all. And you come to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks of better things than that of Abel. You realize you've come to the heavenly Jerusalem. It's the general assembly of the church of the firstborn. We sat down by the waters of Babylon, and we wept. We actually wept about the times that we had had before, and the joy that we had had before, and the things that we'd done before in Jerusalem. We hung our harps on the willow tree, and we said, oh, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its cunning. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. Jerusalem, which is above, is the whole church of God through time, whom we love like our very life, whom we will not forget, who we say, if I forget these, let my right hand forget my cunning. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I don't prefer that general assembly of the firstborn who are written in heaven above my chief joy. If I am not able to sing the Lord's song wherever I am, as those men would have, as those women did, as those who made that sacrifice for the sake of the service of God. He says, see that you refuse not him that speaks, verse 25. If they escape not who refused him that spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him that speaks from heaven. Whose voice then shook the earth, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more, and I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. I'm shaking everything. The earth, the skies, everything is going to shake. And this word, yet once more, signifies the removing of those things that are shaken as of things that were made, so that those things that cannot be shaken may remain. In that short statement, folks, you've got the sum total of what's going on in your own life. God says he will shake the heavens, he will shake the earth, he will shake the institutions that you and I create that we call the church, but are nothing more than an assembly of God's people in Tyler, an assembly of God's people here or there or wherever it may be. That God will shake whatever there is that is put together so that only the things that cannot be shaken will remain. What can't be shaken? Your faith. The fact that you trust him. The fact that you will go to the death for him. The fact that you will obey him, that you will honor him. The faith that cannot be shaken will remain, and nothing else is going to be left standing. Nothing. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom that cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and a godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. How do we do it? Well, it's faith. Faith is an anchor. Faith, when nothing else works, faith is there. And faith finds expression in so many ways, and we, I think, also stir up one another's faith. There's a lady, for example, that I don't think I have met this lady. If I did, it was a long time ago, but I know her because of the number of prayer requests that I've answered for her over the years, and she has always had a struggle. Life has been very, very difficult for her and for her family. And she would write with a prayer request and let us know what her needs were, and we would respond. She was one of the very first donors for Christian Educational Ministries when we started out and let people know what it was we were doing. One of the very first to come through. And she came through with a donation of $2. And it may have been the largest donation in God's eyes that we got in the first few weeks of this work, in spite of some rather significant donations that came in during that period of time, because it came out of a deep personal need that she was able to give because she wanted to help even when she really couldn't help, because she wanted to sing the Lord's song, as it were. Just a week or so ago, I got a letter from her that says, "Enclosed is my tithe for $15. And she asked about a couple of tapes. She said, "I received the Revelation 1 tape. I was supposed to receive the second one, didn't. Could I please have it?" Yes, Mr. Dart, I did get a job doing paperwork in an insurance office. I'm only contracted for doing the paperwork, and because she's a newer agent, she can only pay me $50 a week. It's putting food on the table. But it doesn't quite reach the bills. So today I applied for food stamps to help until she is able to pay me more. Because I had to spend a lot of years on AFDC, my pride did not want to do this. But we needed temporary help, and now is not the time for too much pride. God is blessing us. A start in the right direction has been made. This is only temporary. You know, faith like that just, I don't know if you understand this or not. I think you have the idea that we're supposed to help your faith. But people like that are some of the source of my faith. Whenever someone can come along like that, she says, this is temporary. It's only a start. This is not the end of things. This is only the beginning of things. Thank you for your prayers and caring. It is truly appreciated. And thank you for the wonderful sermon tapes. They are so positive. Here we go, folks. You know, there are people out there depending on us to help them in a positive and an uplifting way. And she says, it brings me back to the fire we all seemed to feel when CGI was new. Everything, and this, by the way, is written to the staff down here, to all of us, not merely to me. It basically says, everything you're putting across is so good and right. It's plain to see that God is blessing this whole effort. Well, I'm encouraged to hear that. I guess we've all needed a wake-up call. Boy, I sure did. I'd much rather have that than to have God raise up rocks to do the job we should be doing. May God bless you all. You are doing a wonderful job. Sincerely, your sister in Christ, Kathy. Now, you know, faith like that is humbling. But it is faith like that that is expected of us, that is required of us. It isn't something that's huge or great or that we can't reach. Jesus, when he upbraided his disciples for their lack of faith, would not have upbraided them if he hadn't have expected better from them. And I think he does expect better for us. The task ahead for us, just as perhaps in your own life, wherever you find yourself, kind of lost and alone wherever it is, the task ahead is daunting, and it is sometimes frightening, and it is awfully easy to get depressed and just quit. Go do something else, whatever it is that you have to do with your life. What keeps us from doing that is faith. We may be sitting down by the waters of Babylon, but we will sing the Lord's song, even in a strange and lonely land.